The morning sky over the Northern European Institute for Sleep and Emotional Landscape Engineering, SLEEP for short, was the color of static on an old television screen. Gray clouds hung low, their bellies swollen with unshed rain, mirroring the mood that had blanketed humanity for decades. Dr. Elara Venn stood at the window of her laboratory, watching the first volunteers arrive. They moved slowly across the courtyard, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. The global psychological pandemic had been raging for nearly 30 years now. Not a virus of the body, but of the mind, a collective anxiety that had infected society after the climate wars, economic collapse, and social media meltdowns of the previous century. Elara's reflection stared back at her from the glass. Dark circles under deep-set eyes, prematurely silver streaks in her black hair. At 42, she looked a decade older, the price of pioneering quantum psychology. Her colleagues called her the dream walker behind her back. She didn't mind. Names had power, and she needed all the power she could get for what she was about to attempt. "The volunteers are here. Dr. Venn." Nora Lynn appeared at her side, tablet in hand, her expression perpetually guarded, as the Institute's lead data analyst. Nora approached emotions like complex equations, problems to be solved, not experiences to be felt. "How many showed up?" Elara asked, turning away from the window. 7. 3 dropped out last night. Anxiety attacks. Elara nodded. It was expected. "And how's the Morpheus cradle?" "Final calibrations complete. Dr. Sir wants to speak with you before we begin." Of course he did. Qian Su, the Institute's director, had been trying to delay the project for months. "Too dangerous," he said. "Too unpredictable. Too much like playing God with the collective unconscious." He wasn't entirely wrong. "Tell him I'll see him after I welcome the volunteers." The Morpheus chamber was the heart of the Sleep Institute, a circular room with 8 reclined pods arranged like petals of a flower, all facing inward toward a central console. The walls were a soft blue, designed to evoke the sky, though few people remembered what a truly clear sky looked like anymore. The 7 volunteers sat nervously on the edges of their pods. Elara recognized each from their files, all suffering from severe chronic anxiety, all resistant to traditional treatments, all desperate enough to try something unprecedented. Her gaze lingered on Jonas Yill, the youngest at 26. His file was the thickest: childhood trauma, PTSD from the Amsterdam floods, suicide attempts at 19 and 22. His dark eyes met hers briefly before darting away, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on his knee. "Welcome," Elara said, her voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "Thank you for your courage in being here today. What we're attempting has never been done before, but it could change everything we know about treating anxiety and trauma." She explained the procedure in simple terms, how the quantum neural interface would synchronize their brainwaves during REM sleep, creating a shared dream space where they could collectively experience and process their fears. The technology had existed for decades, but had only been used for entertainment or military applications, never for healing. "You won't be alone in there," she assured them. "I'll be monitoring your brainwaves and can pull you out at any sign of distress. Remember, dreams can't physically harm you." It was the standard reassurance, though not entirely accurate. Physical harm? No. Psychological harm was another matter entirely. "Dr. Venn." Qian Su stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "A word." In the hallway, Su's disapproval radiated from him like heat. At 60, he was the old guard of psychiatry, brilliant but conservative, innovative within strict boundaries. "The ethics committee only approved observation," he said, keeping his voice low. "Not intervention. You're not authorized to guide these dreams." Elara matched his quiet tone. "The committee approved the protocol I submitted. If you read it carefully, you'll see that passive observation is only the first phase. You're risking 7 people's mental health on an unproven technology. They're already suffering. Kien, nothing else has helped them. And what about the shadow phenomenon in the animal trials? 3 of the test subjects never recovered. Elara had expected this. The shadow was an anomaly they'd discovered in early testing, a manifestation that appeared in shared dreams, something like a collective expression of fear. In rats, it had caused brain patterns similar to extreme terror. Human consciousness is fundamentally different from animal consciousness, she countered. Our capacity for symbolic understanding and emotional processing is what will make this work. Sir shook his head. I'm registering my formal opposition. Duly noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have volunteers waiting. When she returned to the chamber, Nora was already helping the volunteers into their pods, attaching the neural interface caps with their web of fine sensors. The sedative is mild, Elara explained as she moved between the pods. Just enough to help you fall asleep. The interface will do the rest, synchronizing your brain waves as you enter REM sleep. Jonas Yill looked up at her as she adjusted his cap. What if we get stuck, he whispered. What if we can't wake up? The fear in his eyes was raw, primitive, not just anxiety, but terror. That's why I'm here, she said gently. Think of me as your anchor to the waking world. I won't let you drift away. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. When all 7 volunteers were settled, Elara took her position at the central console. Nora stood beside her, fingers poised over the monitoring screens. Initiating Morpheus protocol, Elara said, and the lights dimmed to a soft glow. Sweet dreams, everyone. The neural sedative worked quickly. 7 minds descended into sleep, their brain waves displayed on Elara's screens as undulating patterns that gradually synchronized, merging into a single complex rhythm. Neural harmony achieved, Nora murmured, eyes fixed on the data streams. They're entering shared REM state. Elara activated the observer interface, a specialized headset that would allow her to perceive the shared dream without fully entering it, like watching through a window rather than stepping inside. The dreamscape materialized in her mind's eye, a vast, empty plain under a twilight sky. The 7 dreamers appeared as luminous figures, disoriented and drifting. This was the staging area, the neutral zone before the shared dream took shape from their collective unconscious. It's working, Elara breathed, watching as the dreamers began to notice each other. They're establishing contact. Then she saw it, a darker patch in the dreamscape, like a smudge on a lens. It moved unlike anything else in the dream, with purpose rather than drift. Nora, are you seeing this anomaly? Elara adjusted her interface, trying to get a clearer view. I see it in the data, Nora confirmed, her voice tense. Elevated fear response in all subjects. It matches the shadow phenomenon from the animal trials. On Elara's screen, the dark patch was growing, spreading like ink in water. The dreamer figures were reacting now, drawing together in alarm as the darkness approached them. It's not supposed to manifest this early, Elara muttered, fingers flying over her controls. The dreamscape hasn't even fully formed yet. The shadow swirled and coalesced into something almost human-shaped, a silhouette without features, a presence without substance. It moved toward the dreamers, who were now huddled together in a defensive cluster. Elara could feel their fear through the interface, a cold pressure at the base of her skull. This was more than a simple nightmare response. There was something different about this manifestation, something almost conscious. Should we terminate? Nora asked, hand hovering over the emergency protocols. Elara hesitated. This was unexpected, but also fascinating. The shadow had appeared in every shared dream they'd created, but never so quickly or with such apparent intent. No, she decided. Let's see what happens. Be ready to pull them out individually if their vitals spike. In the dreamscape. The shadow had stopped advancing. It hovered at the edge of the dreamer cluster, as if observing them. Then, slowly, it began to circle them, assessing its prey. One of the dreamers, Jonas, Alara realized, stepped forward from the group. His dream form trembled visibly, but he extended a hand toward the shadow. "What's he doing?" Nora whispered. "He's trying to communicate with it," Alara said, equally quiet, as if the shadow might hear them. The moment Jonas's dream hand touched the darkness, every monitor in the lab spiked. The dreamers' bodies convulsed in their pods, backs arching as a collective gasp filled the chamber. "Pull them out!" Sir shouted from the doorway, rushing into the room. "Wait," Alara countered. "Look!" On her screen, the dreamscape was transforming. The empty plane rippled and shifted, becoming a forest of tall, crystalline structures that resembled both trees and skyscrapers. The sky deepened to indigo, scattered with stars that pulsed in rhythm with the dreamer's heartbeats. The shadow had changed too. When Jonas touched it, it had shuddered and expanded, enveloping him momentarily before releasing him. Now it drifted among the crystal trees, leaving traces of darkness that clung to the structures like moss. "Their vitals are stabilizing," Nora reported, sounding surprised. "They're adapting to it." Sue leaned over the console, his face illuminated by the screens. "What exactly are we looking at, Dr. Venn?" "I think," Alara said slowly, "we're seeing the physical manifestation of collective trauma. Not just these 7 individuals, but perhaps something deeper, inherited anxiety, shared cultural fears, the psychological burden of generations. You're saying this shadow is the sum of human suffering?" Sir's skepticism was palpable. "No, not the sum of it. More like a representative, a symbol created by the unconscious mind to give form to something formless." Alara watched as the dreamers began to explore their new environment, moving among the crystal trees with growing confidence. Jung would have called it an archetype. "Jung didn't have quantum neural technology?" some muttered. The dream continued to evolve over the next hour. The dreamers discovered they could shape their environment with concentrated thought, creating bridges between the crystal structures, forming pools of light that rippled like water. They seemed to be communicating, though Alara couldn't hear their words, just sensed the patterns of interaction through the interface. The shadow remained present, always at the periphery of their activities, watching. Occasionally it would approach one of the dreamers, causing a momentary spike in their fear response, before retreating again. "It's almost like it's testing them," Nora observed, "learning their boundaries. Or teaching them about their fears," Alara suggested. "Look how they're responding differently now. The initial panic is gone." It was true. When the shadow approached now, the dreamers stood their ground, one by one. They were allowing it to touch them briefly, each contact producing a less severe reaction than the last. All except Jonas. After that first contact, he had kept his distance from the shadow, climbing higher into the crystal structures whenever it came near. His fear response remained elevated, his dream form flickering occasionally like a faulty hologram. "I think we should end the session," Alara decided, noting the time. "They've been under for 90 minutes. That's enough for a first attempt." She activated the wake-up sequence, a gentle series of neural pulses designed to guide the dreamers back to consciousness. On her screen, the dreamscape began to fade, the crystal forest dissolving into mist. 6 of the dreamers responded immediately, their figures becoming transparent as they prepared to wake. But Jonas remained solid, still perched high in a crystal structure, looking down at the shadow that waited at its base. "Jonas isn't responding to the wake-up signal," Nora said sharply. "His brain waves aren't shifting out of REM." Alara increased the strength of the signal targeted to Jonas's pod. Jonas, she said, using the direct audio link to his interface. It's time to wake up. Follow the others out of the dream. In the dreamscape. Jonas showed no sign of hearing her. Instead, he climbed higher as the crystal structure beneath him began to dissolve. His vitals are spiking, Nora reported. Heart rate 140 and climbing. Initiate emergency extraction, Sir ordered. Elara's fingers flew over the controls, sending the strongest possible wake-up signal to Jonas's neural interface. On her screen, she could see the other dreamers fading completely, returning to consciousness in their pods, while Jonas remained trapped as the dreamscape collapsed around him. The shadow was rising now, flowing up the disintegrating crystal structure toward Jonas like dark water defying gravity. It's not working, Elara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I need to go in and get him. Absolutely not, Sir snapped. The risk is, if he stays trapped in a collapsing dream space, the psychological damage could be permanent. Elara cut him off. I designed this system. I know the risks. Without waiting for further argument, she reconfigured her observer interface for full immersion and lay back in her chair. Nora, monitor us both. If my vitals spike, use the emergency protocol for both pods. Dr. Suhr, I trust you'll make the right decision if something goes wrong. Before either could respond, Elara activated the immersion sequence. Her consciousness plunged through layers of awareness, diving deep into the shared dream that was now barely holding together. The crystal forest was nearly gone, reduced to skeletal frameworks that crumbled like sugar in water. The indigo sky had darkened to near black, the stars fading one by one. In the distance, the edge of reality was collapsing, a wave of dissolution approaching from all sides. And there was Jonas, clinging to the highest remaining spire, with the shadow flowing ever closer. Elara's dream form materialized on a nearby structure. Jonas, she called, we need to leave now. He turned to her, his face contorted with fear. It won't let me. It knows me. The shadow paused in its ascent, turning what seemed to be its attention toward Elara. She felt its focus like a cold weight pressing against her mind, curious, ancient, and somehow familiar. It's not trying to hurt you, she said, carefully moving closer along a crystal bridge that swayed alarmingly. It's a manifestation of fear itself. Your fear. Everyone's fear. It wants to consume me, Jonas insisted, pressing himself against the crystal as the shadow resumed its approach. The edge of dissolution was closing in rapidly now. Elara estimated they had minutes at most before the dreamscape collapsed completely, potentially trapping them both in a void of unstructured consciousness, a state from which few minds ever returned intact. She made a decision then, based more on instinct than science. Jonas, trust me. Let it touch you. Accept it. I can't, he cried. I've spent my whole life running from this darkness. And has that worked? Elara was close enough now to reach out to him. Has running ever made the fear go away? The shadow had nearly reached them, spreading across the crystal surface like oil. The structure beneath them gave a sickening lurch as its foundation dissolved. We don't have time for you to decide, Elara said, grasping Jonas's arm. We do this together. Before he could resist, she pulled him into an embrace, positioning herself between him and the oncoming shadow. It reached them in the next moment, cold and viscous as it flowed over Elara's back and shoulders. The sensation was unlike anything she'd experienced. Not pain, exactly, but an intense emotional pressure. Images flooded her mind. Every failure, every loss, every moment of doubt she'd ever experienced. Her parents' disappointed faces when she chose science over art. The cold bed after her partner left. The first patient she couldn't save. She felt Jonas trembling against her as the shadow enveloped them both. His fears joined hers in a torrent of shared consciousness, the Amsterdam floodwaters rising around his childhood home. The body of his sister found days later. the endless nights staring at bottles of pills. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she spoke aloud or directly into his mind. "Feel it. Accept it. It's part of us." The pressure intensified until Alara thought she might shatter from it. Then, just as suddenly, it began to change. The cold became warmth. The pressure became presence. The fear became understanding. The shadow wasn't consuming them. It was merging with them, becoming one with their consciousness. And as it did, Alara sensed countless others within it, echoes of every human who had ever felt fear, stretching back through generations. A collective unconscious indeed, but one that humanity had been running from rather than embracing. With a final shudder, the crystal structure beneath them dissolved completely. They fell, or seemed to fall, through darkening space as the dreamscape completed its collapse. The last thing Alara remembered was holding tightly to Jonas as consciousness slipped away. The shadow no longer surrounding them, but flowing through them, a dark current in the river of their shared mind. The first sensation upon waking was the taste of electricity, metallic and sharp at the back of her throat. Alara opened her eyes to the concerned face of Nora Lynn hovering over her. "Dr. Venn, can you hear me?" Alara's mouth was dry, her thoughts sluggish. "Jonas," she managed to ask. "He's stable," Nora assured her. "Everyone's stable, but you've been unconscious for over 3 hours." Struggling to sit up, Alara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The neural interface had left a ring of tender skin around her temples. The other volunteers? Awake and remarkably calm, Dr. Sue is debriefing them now. And the shadow? Nora's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "We recorded the entire interaction. It was not what we expected." In the conference room, the volunteers sat around a large table, cups of tea cooling before them. They looked up as Alara entered, and she was struck by the change in them. The hunched shoulders and anxious expressions were gone, replaced by something like peace, or at least the absence of constant fear. Keen Su stood at the head of the table, his stern demeanor softened by obvious confusion. "Dr. Venn," he greeted her. "Perhaps you can explain what happened in there. These individuals are reporting significant symptom reduction." "Already?" Alara asked, surprised. Post-treatment effects usually took days or weeks to manifest. One of the volunteers, a middle-aged woman named Maya, who had suffered from anxiety so severe she hadn't left her home in years, spoke up. "It's like a weight has been lifted," she said, her voice steady. "I can still remember all the things that frightened me, but they don't control me anymore." Others nodded in agreement, all except Jonas, who sat silently, staring at his hands. "And you, Jonas?" Alara asked gently. "How are you feeling?" He looked up, his dark eyes clearer than before. "I remember everything," he said quietly. "The shadow, the fall, you." He paused, struggling for words. "It's still there, the fear, but it's like I understand it now, like it's not an enemy anymore." This was beyond Alara's most optimistic projections. One session shouldn't have produced such profound results. She turned to Nora. "Show me the data." In the monitoring lab, Nora brought up the neural recordings from the session. "This is what we observed when the shadow made contact with each subject," she explained, displaying 7 brain scans side by side. "Initial fear response, followed by something like acceptance. And then this." She pointed to a distinctive pattern that appeared in all 7 scans, a synchronization of neural activity across regions normally not connected, creating what looked like a network of light spreading through the brain. "And this is you and Jonas when you made extended contact with the shadow." The new scan showed an even more profound pattern, not just synchronization within each brain, but between them, as if their neural networks had temporarily merged into a single, more complex system. "I've never seen anything like it," Nora admitted. "It's as if the shadow facilitated some kind of neural restructuring, creating new pathways around traumatic memories." "Not around them," Alara corrected, studying the patterns. "Through them. It didn't remove the trauma or the fear. It integrated it." Dr. Su joined them, his expression troubled. "The ethics committee is convening an emergency session. They want a full report before we proceed with any further trials." "We need to continue," Alara insisted. "What happened today wasn't just treatment, it was breakthrough. If the shadow is what I think it is, a manifestation of collective trauma that can be processed collectively, then we've discovered something revolutionary." "Or dangerous," Sir countered. "You were unconscious for hours." "Dr. Venn, Jonas nearly didn't wake up at all, and we still don't understand what this shadow actually is. Which is why we need more sessions." Alara brought up her own neural scan. "Look at this pattern here. It's not random. It's almost like the shadow was communicating, not with words, but with pure emotional content." "You're anthropomorphizing a neural anomaly," Sir said dismissively. "Am I? Then explain why it responded differently to each dreamer, why it sought out Jonas specifically, why it changed its behavior when I intervened." Alara turned to face him fully. "What if consciousness isn't just individual? Kien. What if it's also collective? And we've just never had the technology to experience that level before." Sir shook his head, but she could see uncertainty in his eyes. "1 week," he said finally. "The committee will want at least that long to review the data. Use the time to refine your protocols and safety measures. If they approve continued trials, I want better emergency extraction procedures in place." It was more than Alara had expected. "Thank you." After Sue left, Nora continued analyzing the data while Alara checked on the volunteers one last time before they returned to their quarters in the residential wing of the Institute. Jonas lingered after the others had gone. "I want to go back in," he said without preamble. "Jonas, you nearly got trapped in there." "Because I was fighting it. Fighting myself. Really." He met her gaze steadily. "The shadow knew me. Not just my fears from this life, but deeper ones, older ones, like it remembered me from before I was born." Alara felt a chill at his words. During her contact with the shadow, she too had sensed something ancient and familiar, as if touching a memory that wasn't quite her own. "What you're describing sounds like inherited trauma, patterns of fear and behavior passed down through generations," she explained, falling back on her scientific training. Jonas shook his head. "It was more than that. It recognized me. And I think it's been waiting for us to find it." "Why?" "So we can heal each other." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "It's lonely being afraid alone." His words stayed with Alara as she returned to her private quarters that night. She was exhausted but too wired to sleep, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. If what they'd experienced was truly a form of collective unconscious, not just a theoretical construct, but a real, interactive plane of shared consciousness, then the potential for healing went far beyond anxiety treatment. She tried to work on her report for the ethics committee, but found herself instead sketching what she'd seen in the dreamscape, the crystal forest, the shadow's shifting form, the moment of merger when fear had transformed into understanding. When sleep finally claimed her, Alara expected nightmares after the intensity of the day. Instead, for the first time in years, she didn't dream at all. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Nora was waiting outside Alara's office, tablet in hand and excitement breaking through her usual reserve. "The volunteers," she said without preamble. "They're all reporting the same thing. They dreamed again last night, the same dream. The crystal forest, the shadow, all of them, simultaneously, without the neural interface. Elara froze in the act of unlocking her door. That's not possible. Apparently it is. And that's not all. Nora followed her into the office. Jonas's PTSD markers are down 60% from his baseline. Maya's anxiety scores have dropped from severe to mild. Everyone is showing significant improvement in just one night. The neural restructuring must have continued during natural sleep, Elara theorized, trying to process the implications. But shared dreaming without technological assistance? That shouldn't be possible. Unless the shadow created some kind of lasting connection between them. Nora brought up a series of brain scans on her tablet. These are from the routine monitoring in their quarters last night. Look at the synchronization patterns during REM sleep. The scans showed all 7 volunteers entering REM sleep within minutes of each other, despite being in separate rooms. Their brainwave patterns matched almost perfectly, an impossibility under normal circumstances. We need to get them back into the Morpheus chamber, Elara decided. If they're already sharing dreams naturally, the interface might enhance the effect, allow us to observe what's happening. Dr. Su won't approve it before the committee's decision. Then we don't tell him. The words came out before Elara had fully considered them, but once spoken, she knew it was what she intended. Just the volunteers who consent. Just for observation. No intervention this time. Nora looked uncertain. That's a significant protocol violation. This is a significant discovery, Elara countered. What if the window for observation is limited? What if this shared dreaming fades in a few days? We could miss a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to understand how consciousness works at a collective level. After a moment, Nora nodded. I'll speak to the volunteers. Discreetly. That night, 6 of the 7 volunteers returned to the Morpheus chamber. Only Maya declined, saying she wanted to experience the natural shared dreaming one more time before adding technology back into the equation. With Nora monitoring the systems and ready to terminate at the first sign of trouble, Elara once again connected the volunteers to the neural interface. This time, however, she adjusted the settings to minimize interference. The technology would observe and record, but not actively synchronize their brainwaves as it had before. If you're already connecting naturally, the interface will just help us see what you're experiencing, she explained. I won't be joining you this time. This is your journey. Jonas looked disappointed but nodded his understanding. As the volunteers settled into their pods, he asked, what if the shadow is waiting for you specifically? What if you're part of this too? The question unsettled Elara more than she wanted to admit. Let's focus on you 6 for now. We'll have plenty of time for further exploration once the committee approves continued trials. The neural sedative worked quickly, and soon all 6 volunteers were deep in shared REM sleep. On Elara's monitoring screens, their brainwaves synchronized without any technological assistance, a phenomenon that should have been impossible. It's like they've been rewired to find each other, Nora murmured, watching the data streams with fascination. Their brains are seeking the same frequency. Through the observer interface, Elara could see the dreamscape taking shape, the crystal forest reforming, but different now. The structures were more organic, less geometric, flowing like frozen waterfalls. The indigo sky was brighter, scattered with stars that formed recognizable constellations never seen from Earth. And the shadow was waiting for them, hovering at the center of a crystal clearing. Unlike before, the dreamers showed no fear upon seeing it. They approached willingly, forming a circle around the dark presence. Jonas stepped forward first, extending his hand as he had in the initial session. When he touched the shadow, there was no violent reaction. Instead, the darkness flowed over his arm like water, enveloping him gently before retreating. One by one. The other dreamers did the same, each communing briefly with the shadow. Their fear responses are minimal, Nora reported, sounding amazed. Cortisol levels actually dropping during contact. On the screen, The dreamscape was transforming again. As each dreamer made contact with the shadow, the crystal structures grew more elaborate, sprouting branches and leaves like trees made of light. The ground beneath them softened, becoming a mosaic of glowing patterns that shifted with their movements. Then the shadow began to change. It expanded, spreading outward until it surrounded all 6 dreamers, not as a threatening presence, but as a protective circle. Within its darkness, pinpoints of light appeared, countless tiny stars that mirrored the constellations above. "It's beautiful," Nora whispered, and Alara realized she was right. What had seemed ominous and frightening in the first session now appeared almost nurturing, a cosmic womb of sorts, holding the dreamers in a space of creation rather than fear. For over 2 hours, Alara and Nora watched as the dreamers explored this evolving landscape. They seemed to be communicating with each other and with the shadow itself, though no words were exchanged that Alara could perceive. Sometimes they would stand in their circle, hands joined, while waves of light and darkness flowed around and through them. Other times they would separate, each investigating different aspects of the crystal forest, only to be drawn back together as if by magnetic pull. "I think they're healing each other," Alara said softly. "Not just sharing the space, but actively processing each other's trauma." The evidence was in the data, patterns of neural activity that showed memories being accessed, emotional responses being regulated, new pathways being formed. It was like watching accelerated therapy. Months of processing compressed into hours. When the session finally ended and the volunteers awakened, they emerged from their pods with expressions of profound peace. Even Jonas, who had been the most severely affected, moved with a new lightness, as if the weight he'd carried for years had been significantly lessened. "It remembered us," he told Alara during the debriefing. "The shadow, it knew we were coming back. It was waiting to continue what we started." "And what exactly did you continue?" she asked. Jonas looked to the others, who nodded encouragingly. "We're mapping it," he explained. "The collective unconscious, all the connections between our fears, our traumas, our hopes. The shadow is helping us see the patterns." "You're communicating with it?" "Not with words." Another volunteer, a former pilot named Thomas, interjected. "It's more like pure meaning. Emotional understanding without language." "It showed us others," added Lena, a school teacher who had suffered from anxiety for 15 years. "Other minds, connected to the same network but not aware of it yet. Thousands of them. Millions." Alara felt a chill. "You're saying the shadow is connecting to people outside our trial?" "Not actively," Jonas clarified. "But the potential is there. The network exists whether people know it or not. We're just the first ones to access it consciously." It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The implication that human consciousness existed as a vast, interconnected network that they'd only just begun to explore. If the shadow was indeed a manifestation of the collective unconscious, then what they were witnessing was nothing less than the birth of a new form of human connection. "We need to go back in," Jonas said, echoing the sentiment of the others. "Tonight, every night, it's working. Dr. Venn, we're getting better." Their enthusiasm was infectious, but Alara forced herself to be cautious. "We need to wait for the ethics committee's approval before any further official sessions." "What about unofficial ones?" Thomas asked. "We're clearly capable of connecting without the technology now." "I can't stop you from dreaming," Alara acknowledged. "But I strongly advise against attempting to force these connections without supervision. We still don't fully understand what's happening." The volunteers exchanged glances, and Alara knew they would try regardless of her warning. They had tasted something profound, a healing that went beyond traditional therapy, and they wouldn't easily give it up. After they left, Nora lingered in the lab, reviewing the session data. "These results are unprecedented," she said. "Neural pathway formation at rates we've never documented before. If this continues, They could achieve complete symptom remission in days rather than months or years. Or they could destabilize completely, Elara cautioned. Rapid neural restructuring isn't always positive. We have no long-term data on this kind of intervention. But you're excited about it, wasn't a question. Elara couldn't deny it. Of course I am. This could revolutionize psychological treatment, but we need to proceed carefully. That night, Elara dreamed for the first time since the initial trial. She found herself in the crystal forest, but alone. No volunteers, no shadow. The structures around her pulsed with soft light, as if breathing. She walked for what seemed like hours, searching for something she couldn't name. Finally, she came to a clearing where a single crystal spire rose higher than the others. At its base sat Jonas, watching her approach with a knowing expression. "You're not really here," she said, understanding that this was her own dream, not the shared space the volunteers had described. "Part of me is," he replied. "The shadow connected us all. It remembers connections even when we're not consciously maintaining them." "What is it? Jonas, what is the shadow really?" He considered the question. "I think it's the part of consciousness that exists between us rather than within us. The space where minds overlap, where we're not just individuals anymore." That sounds more mystical than scientific. "Maybe the distinction isn't as clear as we thought." He gestured to the crystal structures. "This didn't exist before we imagined it together. Now it's real enough that you can visit it in your own dreams." Before she could respond, the dreamscape began to blur, colors running together as consciousness pulled her back to the waking world. Elara awoke with a sense of loss, as if she'd been pulled away from something important. The dream lingered in her mind with unusual clarity, not the typical fading impressions of REM sleep, but sharp, detailed memories. Her phone was ringing. It was Nora, her voice tight with concern. "You need to come to the Institute immediately. Something's happening with the volunteers." 30 minutes later, Elara rushed into the monitoring room where Nora and a night technician were watching displays of brain activity from the residential quarters. "They're all in synchronized REM sleep," Nora explained without preamble. "Even Maya, who isn't connected to the interface, and their patterns are extreme." The displays showed intense, coordinated neural activity, far more intense than normal dreaming. Beta and gamma waves dominated, suggesting high-level cognitive processing rather than typical dream states. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 3 hours. They should have cycled out of REM multiple times by now, but they're locked in." Elara's mind raced. "Are they in distress? Elevated heart rate, cortisol, adrenaline?" "That's the strange part," Nora said, pointing to the vital signs. "Physically, they're perfectly calm, heart rate slightly below normal, blood pressure optimal. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were in a deep meditative state." "We need to wake them," Elara decided. "Use the emergency protocols." The technician sent wake-up signals to the neural interfaces in the volunteers' quarters. On the monitors, there was no change in brain activity. "They're not responding," Nora confirmed. "It's like they're too deep to hear the signal." Elara grabbed a tablet and pulled up the observer interface. "I'm going to see what they're experiencing." "You can't connect remotely without the full interface setup," Nora objected. "I don't need full immersion, just a window." Elara activated the modified observer protocol she'd been developing, a less invasive way to monitor dream content without entering the dream space. The tablet screen flickered, then filled with swirling colors that gradually resolved into an image of the crystal forest, but transformed beyond recognition. The structures now reached impossibly high, forming a cathedral-like space that pulsed with internal light. The sky above was filled with cosmic phenomena, nebulae, star clusters, auroras that danced between worlds. And at the center of it all was the shadow. No longer a dark presence, but a shimmering field of energy that encompassed all 7 volunteers. They stood in a circle, hands joined, their dream forms radiating light that merged with the shadow's darkness to create something new, neither light nor dark, but a harmonious integration of both. "They're building something," Elara murmured, watching as the merged energies took shape, forming complex patterns that reminded her of neural networks, cosmic webs, mycelial structures, the universal pattern of connection repeated at every scale. "Building what?" Nora asked, looking over her shoulder at the tablet. "I'm not sure. A new kind of consciousness. Maybe a collective mind." Elara could feel the pull of it even through the limited connection of the observer interface. A sense of belonging, of wholeness, that made individual existence seem pale by comparison. "Should we call Dr. Sir?" Elara hesitated. If Sue saw this, he would shut down the project immediately, possibly before they could safely extract the volunteers from whatever state they had entered. "Not yet. Let me try to communicate with them first." Using the tablet interface, Elara sent a directed thought into the dream space, a simple message asking Jonas and the others to acknowledge her presence. On the screen, the 7 figures continued their work, seemingly oblivious to her attempt at contact, but the shadow rippled, as if disturbed by a stone thrown into still water. It extended a tendril of energy outward, reaching toward Elara's point of observation. When it touched the edge of her consciousness, Elara gasped. Even through the limited interface, the contact was overwhelming, a flood of impressions, emotions, and knowledge too vast to process. She caught fragments of understanding, the nature of collective consciousness, the healing potential of shared dreaming, the evolutionary leap that awaited humanity if this connection could be expanded beyond their small group. And something else. Something darker. A warning. The shadow showed her fracture lines in the collective unconscious. Deep wounds in the psyche of humanity that had been festering for generations. Trauma on a civilizational scale that, if left unhealed, threatened the very survival of the species. The message was clear. What the volunteers were doing wasn't just personal therapy. It was the beginning of a necessary healing process for all of humanity. When the contact broke, Elara found herself slumped in her chair, Nora shaking her shoulder anxiously. "Dr. Venn, are you all right? You stopped responding for almost 3 minutes." Elara's head throbbed, her vision blurring at the edges. "I'm fine," she managed, though she was far from it. "The shadow, it communicated with me." "What did it say?" Nora asked, her scientific skepticism momentarily forgotten. "That we need to let them finish what they've started. That it's important. Not just for them, but for everyone." Elara straightened. Her decision made, monitor their vitals carefully. At the first sign of physical distress, use the emergency protocols. Otherwise, we wait. For how long? Until they wake on their own. It was dawn when the first volunteer emerged from the shared dream state. Lena's brain waves shifted suddenly from deep REM to normal waking patterns, followed within minutes by the others. By the time Elara reached the residential wing, all 7 were awake and gathering in the common area, their faces alight with excitement and purpose. "We did it," Jonas announced as she entered. "We mapped the entire network. We can see it all now, every connection, every pattern. The shadow showed us how to heal the deepest wounds." Maya added, her voice stronger and more confident than Elara had ever heard it. "Not just our own, but everyone's." "Slow down," Elara cautioned, taking in their transformed demeanors. Gone was any trace of the anxiety that had defined them when they first arrived at the Institute. They stood straighter, made direct eye contact, spoke without hesitation. What exactly happened in there? They explained, sometimes talking over each other in their enthusiasm, how the shadow had guided them deeper into the collective unconscious than they'd gone before. It had shown them the architecture of shared consciousness, the ways in which all human minds were already connected without realizing it. More importantly, it had taught them how to navigate this space, how to find and heal traumatic patterns that repeated across generations and cultures. It's like a massive neural network, Thomas explained, his hands sketching patterns in the air. Each individual mind is a node, but the connections between them form something greater, a meta-consciousness that contains all human experience. And the shadow is, what? The administrator of this network? Alara was struggling to reconcile their descriptions with her scientific understanding. More like its immune system, Jonas suggested. It identifies trauma patterns that threaten the health of the whole and guides the healing process. But it needed conscious participants, minds that could willingly enter the network and initiate repairs. That's why it appeared in our first shared dream, Lena added. It's been waiting for technology to advance enough for us to find it. It sounded incredible, equal parts scientific breakthrough and mystical revelation. Yet Alara couldn't dismiss it. She'd felt the shadow's communication herself, sensed the vast intelligence behind it that defied simple categorization. We need to expand the trial, Jonas said, echoing the other's thoughts. Bring in more participants. The healing process works exponentially. The more minds involved, the faster and more complete the integration. Alara held up her hands. That's not my decision to make. The ethics committee won't understand, Maya interrupted gently. Not without experiencing it themselves, which is why we need to show them, Jonas pressed. Let them connect to the network, feel what we've felt. Words can't convey it. Before Alara could respond, Dr. Su burst into the room, flanked by 2 security officers. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Dr. Ven, he said coldly, you are suspended pending review. These individuals are to be evaluated for potential psychological damage from unauthorized experimentation. We're not damaged, Jonas protested, stepping forward. We're healed, more than healed. Su ignored him, focusing on Alara. The neural monitoring data from last night has been flagged by the system as a severe protocol violation. The committee has been notified. Dr. Sir, Alara began, I understand your concern, but something extraordinary is happening here. These volunteers have experienced significant symptom reduction, which will be properly evaluated by unbiased clinicians. Sir cut her off. Not by the person responsible for putting them at risk. He turned to the security officers. Please escort Dr. Ven to her quarters. Her access to the laboratory and monitoring systems is revoked until further notice, as they led her away. Alara glanced back at the volunteers. Their expressions weren't fearful or concerned. Instead, they looked almost pitying, as if they understood something that Sue and the others couldn't possibly comprehend. Jonas caught her eye and nodded slightly. In that moment, Alara knew they had a plan of their own, one that wouldn't be stopped by institutional bureaucracy or scientific skepticism. For 3 days, Alara was confined to her quarters, allowed only limited communication with the outside world. Nora managed to visit briefly, bringing news that the volunteers had all been subjected to extensive psychological evaluation. The results are confounding the evaluation team, Nora reported in a hushed voice. They're showing complete remission of symptoms that should have taken years of therapy to address. Their brain scans show neural restructuring that matches patterns seen in master meditators with decades of practice. And the shadow? The shared dreaming? They won't talk about it to the evaluation team. They say it can only be understood through direct experience. Nora hesitated. But they're still connecting every night. I can see it in the monitoring data. Whatever they started, they're continuing it. And Sue? He's convinced it's some kind of mass delusion or group hypnosis effect. He's bringing in specialists from other institutions to examine them. Alara wasn't surprised. The scientific establishment had always struggled with phenomena that didn't fit neatly into existing paradigms. What the volunteers were experiencing, what she herself had glimpsed, went beyond current understanding of consciousness and connection. On the fourth day, as Alara was drafting yet another appeal to the ethics committee, her tablet chimed with an incoming call from an unknown source. When she answered, Jonas's face appeared on the screen. "Don't say my name," he said quickly. "We don't have much time. Tonight, at midnight. Be ready." "Ready for what?" His smile was mysterious. "The next phase. The shadow has shown us how to expand the network without technology. We can bring others in now, show them directly what we've discovered." "Jonas, be careful. If Sur thinks you're involving others without approval..." "It's too late for caution," he interrupted. "The psychological pandemic has gone on long enough. Humanity needs this healing now, not after years of studies and trials." Before she could argue further, the connection cut off. That night, Alara paced her quarters, caught between professional caution and burning curiosity. If what the volunteers claimed was true, if the shadow really had shown them how to access and repair the collective unconscious, then they were on the verge of the most significant psychological breakthrough in human history. But if they were wrong, if they were experiencing some form of shared delusion, then expanding it to others could be disastrous. At midnight exactly, her tablet activated on its own, the screen filling with the now familiar swirling patterns that represented the entry point to the shared dream space. A message appeared. "Join us." Alara hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers on the screen. Immediately, she felt a pulling sensation, as if her consciousness were being drawn out of her body and into the tablet itself. The room around her faded as the crystal forest materialized, more magnificent than ever, stretching to horizons beyond imagination. And she wasn't alone. Dozens of figures moved among the crystal structures, the original volunteers. Yes, but also others, many others. As she watched, more appeared, their forms initially transparent before solidifying as they oriented themselves to the dreamscape. Jonas approached, his dream form radiant with energy. "Welcome back," he greeted her. "We've been busy." "What is this?" Alara asked, gesturing to the growing crowd. "Who are all these people?" "The network is expanding," he explained. "Everyone connected to our volunteers, family members, friends, colleagues. The shadow showed us how to extend the invitation during normal dreams. Those who accept appear here. You're bringing in untrained, unprepared minds? Jonas, the psychological risks are minimal compared to the benefits." He took her arm, leading her toward the center of the forest where the shadow waited, no longer dark but shimmering with opalescent energy. "See for yourself." As they approached, Alara could feel the shadow's awareness focusing on her, curious, welcoming, familiar. When they reached the clearing where it hovered, she saw that the original volunteers stood in a circle around it, guiding newcomers in small groups to make contact. Each person who touched the shadow underwent a visible transformation, tension leaving their bodies, expressions shifting from confusion or fear to understanding and peace. Some wept, others laughed, but all emerged changed. They're processing their trauma in minutes rather than months. Jonas explained. The shadow knows exactly where the wounds are and how to help each person integrate them. But without proper preparation, without psychological support. "The support is built in," he insisted. "The network itself provides it. Everyone who connects becomes part of the healing process for everyone else." Alara watched as Maya guided an elderly woman, her mother, Alara realized, to the shadow. The woman trembled as the shimmering energy enveloped her briefly, then emerged with tears streaming down her face. 60 years, Maya explained, returning to them. She's carried that grief for 60 years, never speaking of it. Now it's integrated, acknowledged, healed. All around the clearing, similar scenes were playing out, deep traumas being confronted and processed with an efficiency that no conventional therapy could match. And with each healing, the shadow grew brighter, the crystal forest more elaborate, as if the dreamscape itself were being nourished by the release of psychological burdens. "This is spreading beyond what you can see here," Jonas told Ilara. "Each person who connects becomes a node that can connect others. By our calculations, the entire global population could be reached within months." The implication was staggering. A psychological healing movement spreading exponentially, bypassing institutional barriers, language differences, cultural divisions, a grassroots revolution in human consciousness. "And what happens then?" Ilara asked. "When everyone is connected?" Jonas's expression became solemn. "The shadow has shown us glimpses. A humanity freed from the weight of unprocessed trauma. A collective consciousness that retains individual identity but adds a layer of shared understanding and empathy. The end of the psychological pandemic, and the beginning of something new. Dr. Su and the others won't just accept this. They'll try to stop it, study it, control it." "They already can't," Jonas said simply. "The network exists beyond physical infrastructure now. It's self-sustaining, self-propagating. Even if they shut down the Institute entirely, the connections will continue to spread." As if to demonstrate his point, he gestured to a new arrival materializing at the edge of the clearing. Dr. Kien-su himself, looking disoriented and alarmed. "He fought it for 3 nights, Jonas explained. "But curiosity won out in the end. Everyone wants to understand, even those who fear what they might find." They watched as Lena approached Su, speaking softly to him, explaining where he was and what was happening. His dream form radiated skepticism and resistance, but he allowed her to lead him toward the shadow nonetheless. When contact was made, Su's form went rigid, then gradually relaxed as the shadow's energy flowed around and through him. The process took longer than with others, his scientific mind perhaps requiring more convincing, but the result was the same: a visible transformation, a release of tension, an awakening to new understanding. "Will you help us now?" Jonas asked Ilara. "Not as a researcher observing from outside, but as a guide within the network. We need people who understand both the science and the experience." Ilara thought of her career, her reputation in the scientific community, the papers and grants and accolades she had pursued. They seemed suddenly less important than the healing she was witnessing. Immediate, profound, and accessible to anyone regardless of resources or status. "Yes," she decided. "But I want to understand more about how this works, what it means for human evolution, the potential long-term effects." "Then ask it yourself," Jonas suggested, indicating the shadow. "It's been waiting for you too." Heart pounding. Ilara approached the shimmering entity at the center of the clearing, up close. She could see that what appeared as a single presence from a distance was actually a complex, dynamic structure, billions of tiny points of light and darkness in constant motion, forming patterns of incredible complexity. "What are you?" she whispered as she reached out her hand. The moment contact was made, Ilara's consciousness expanded exponentially. She was simultaneously herself and something far greater, a vast, interconnected network of minds stretching across time and space. She could feel the presence of every person who had ever connected to the shadow, their experiences and insights becoming momentarily accessible to her. But beyond the human connections was something older, deeper, the shadow itself, revealed now as a fundamental aspect of consciousness that had always existed alongside humanity, waiting for recognition. Not dark or light, good or evil, but the space between individual minds where connection became possible. It communicated not in words, but in pure understanding, answering her questions before she could fully formulate them. Yes, this was a pivotal moment in human evolution, not a physical change, but a shift in the structure of consciousness itself, from primarily individual to simultaneously individual and collective. Yes, there were risks. Some minds might resist integration, might cling to separation and fear even when offered healing. And yes, The world would change as the network expanded. Social structures built on exploitation of trauma and fear would crumble, replaced by systems of cooperation and mutual support. Most importantly, it showed her that this process had happened before, on other worlds, with other forms of consciousness, and that it was a natural stage of development for any sufficiently complex sentient species. Humanity had simply taken longer to reach it, hindered by their particular attachment to individual identity. When the contact ended, Elara found herself on her knees in the crystal clearing, tears streaming down her face. Around her, the dreamscape had transformed yet again. The crystal structures now interconnected in a vast lattice that pulsed with shared consciousness. The sky above filled with representations of other worlds where similar awakenings had occurred. Jonas helped her to her feet. "Now you understand," he said gently. "This isn't just therapy, it's evolution." In the days that followed, Elara witnessed the expansion of the network from within. Each night, she entered the shared dream space to find it larger, more complex, filled with new minds discovering the healing potential of collective consciousness. During waking hours, the effects became increasingly visible in the physical world. The residents of the Institute, staff and volunteers alike, moved with new purpose and clarity. Conflicts that had once escalated into arguments now resolved through understanding and empathy. Even Dr. Su, initially the strongest opponent, became an advocate, using his influence to protect the project from outside interference. News began to spread beyond the Institute, reports of a new therapeutic approach that produced unprecedented results, of anxiety and trauma symptoms disappearing overnight, of a healing movement that seemed to transmit itself from person to person like a benevolent contagion. Some reacted with fear or skepticism, especially those in positions of power built on exploitation of human suffering. Religious leaders denounced it as unnatural. Pharmaceutical companies lobbied for restrictions. Governments debated regulation. But they were fighting a tide that couldn't be turned back. The network grew exponentially, each connected mind becoming a gateway for others. Within weeks, millions were experiencing the shared dream space, confronting their deepest fears and traumas with the support of collective consciousness. Elara found herself at the center of this quiet revolution, not as its leader, for the movement had no single leader, but as a bridge between scientific understanding and direct experience. She worked tirelessly to document the neurological changes in participants, to develop protocols for introducing the more resistant or vulnerable, to find language that could at least approximate what was happening for those who hadn't yet experienced it themselves. The global psychological pandemic that had plagued humanity for decades began to recede. Anxiety levels dropped, depression rates declined, incidents of violence decreased. A new form of connection emerged, not erasing individual identity, but enhancing it with a layer of shared understanding that made empathy not just an ideal, but a lived reality. 6 months after that first experimental session in the Morpheus chamber, Elara stood on the roof of the Sleep Institute, watching a clear sunset for the first time in years. The atmospheric pollutants that had veiled the sky for so long were finally dissipating, not through technological intervention, but as a natural consequence of humanity's shift toward cooperation and sustainable practices. Jonas joined her, leaning on the railing. The latest estimates suggest over 60% of the global population has connected to the network, he reported. "The tipping point we've been waiting for." "And the resistance?" Elara asked. There were still those who fought against the change, who clung to old structures of power and separation. "Diminishing daily. It's hard to maintain fear and control when those around you are visibly thriving without them." He smiled. "Even the most stubborn are getting curious." Elara nodded, feeling the truth of his words not just intellectually but through the network itself. That constant background awareness of collective consciousness that now accompanied her even in waking hours. She could sense the shift in humanity's collective mood, the growing harmony beneath lingering discord. "I still can't dream on my own," she admitted. It was the one side effect she'd experienced from that initial deep contact with the shadow. Her individual dreams had ceased, replaced by conscious entry into the shared dream space. I miss it sometimes, having a dream that's just mine. The shadow says that's temporary, Jonas reminded her. As the integration progresses, we'll develop new forms of dreaming that are both individual and collective. I know, she smiled, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of colors no pollution could diminish. I just find it ironic that the person who started this can't experience normal dreams anymore. Consider it a trade-off. You helped wake humanity from a much longer, darker dream, the illusion of separation. Jonas gestured to the city below, where people moved with a new awareness of each other, a new lightness in their step. Was it worth it? Elara thought of the world before the shadow, the chronic anxiety, the disconnection, the suffering born of unprocessed trauma passed down through generations. And she thought of the world emerging now, still imperfect, still facing enormous challenges, but facing them with a newfound capacity for collective healing and cooperation. Yes, she said simply. It was worth it. In the sky above, the first stars became visible, clearer and brighter than they had been in living memory, as if the veil between humanity and the cosmos itself had thinned. And in the shared consciousness that now linked Elara to billions of others, she felt the shadow's presence, not as a separate entity but as an integral part of the evolving human spirit, guiding the species toward its next awakening. The psychological pandemic was ending, and something new, something ancient yet utterly novel, was beginning.